Let's switch to the Western Conference though. And we talked about this last week as being one of the big series to look out for, because I thought Minnesota would be able to make things spicy. And they did that and more. They were 6.5 point underdogs in game one. They win outright, which couldn't say that I was out here telling people the money line sprinkle or anything, but right. I'll definitely take the cover. The Wolves win 130-117 in game one against Memphis. Now, the interesting thing to me is game two line is still Memphis -7. And this is a reminder of the NBA and you talking about how the market reacts. They don't really overreact to what happened in a game or two. And, it's a lot of points. I'm going to say it's a lot of points. And obviously I'm going to be on Minnesota again. Give me the points. Minnesota +7 in this. I think what we saw here is that my initial read on this series was that the matchup is just really, really good for Minnesota. We know that adjustments will come, but I trust Minnesota's coach. Minnesota has a really, really good coach, right? In Finch, he's a really good coach, and he makes very good adjustments as well, just in terms of figuring out how to pull the strings with Cat, not being that good of a defensive guy at all. But expect the adjustments on both sides. Is this a Steven Adams series or not? I'm going to say probably not, but that's going to be the most interesting thing to me. I'm still going to be on the T-Wolves because if I was on them at the -6.5, they win outright. Now you're giving me 7 points. Cool. I'm going to take that. I'm not sure what the line ended up being by tip-off for game one, but I'm going to roll with Anthony Edwards. He's your favorite player's favorite player right now. My guy is ready. He wants all the smoke. Give me the Memphis Grizzlies to not. I mean, I'm just taking the points. I'm taking the points. I don't know what's going to happen. Memphis could win that game, but I'm definitely taking the 7 points with the Minnesota Timberwolves.
Yeah. So, okay. A couple of things here, right? Immediate, even just looking at the odds board, right? The thing that jumps out is the 241 point total in this game. And so that goes, okay, dispersion, right? So again, does 7 feel like as many points when the expected total is 241 as it does if this was even 221 or 211, something along those lines, right? And so the answer to that is like, no, that isn't that many points. And I think the indicator here for me is like, yeah, there isn't an adjustment, because this is the perfect example, as you mentioned, of the market going like, okay, great, 1 game sample size. Yeah. And if we can drill that into people's heads, whether it's the NBA or the NFL or whatever sport you want, like you can't do much better than a relatively comfortable victory for the road team here, right? Like this is kind of the biggest disparity off of the point spread from the first game. Again, the same exact point spread, by the way, right? That closed 7. There's even some 7.5s out there. So, again, basically no adjustment, being like, okay, we're going to start from 0 here. We're going to roll the ball back out and we're going to see what happens. And we're not going to change our interpretation of what this series is supposed to look like. We're going to just, have it basically start from scratch, if you will. Now, obviously, from a series standpoint, it's not starting from scratch. And that's why you see a big adjustment to the series price. And I think that's the one that's a little bit more interesting to me in a way, because honestly, I think I would lean Memphis -7, because that -7 feels like a lot of points. But with 241 total points expected here, it just isn't that high, right? And this game could be a very competitive game, and it could just end, 130-120, 125-115. You're just going like, wait a second, how did Memphis cover this game, right? Because I think you and I agree that Memphis is going to win this game. They're not going to lose a second straight game at home. But again, hindsight being 2020, listen, the NBA playoffs, it all kind of works the same every year, right? Especially in that first weekend. You got 8 series. There's probably one in there that is sort of like a pick-a-me game, right? I would make the case that the Celtics and Nets game is that. And then every other game, because of the home court advantage element, every other game is sort of a 5 to 10 point spread. And there's always one upset in there somewhere, right? So it's like 6 teams win outright, 1 gets upset, and then there's a coin flippy type of a game that could go either way, that if the underdog won, in this case the Nets, if they had won, you wouldn't be all that surprised. If you look at it from a hindsight standpoint, like, yeah, a young Memphis team might be that team that it was going to trip up versus a Miami team, for example, that had a really great scheduling spot in a veteran team, the defending champions in Milwaukee, right? Like obviously the sort of anti-hero, reverse thing with the Sixers, where of course, like, they were never, they weren't going to lose that game. Everybody was on the Raptors type thing. The Warriors, who we'll get to, obviously. And then, of course, like, the injured element with the Dallas-Utah series, all of that stuff, right? And of course, the Suns never going to lose that game either, right? So, like, if you kind of work backwards, and if we had said to each other, hey, like, too many people are on the Raptors here in this first game, what's the other game that you could see a team losing at home? It probably would have been this game, right? Because Minnesota, not like they had the rest issue, because they had been done with their play-in tournament situation back on Tuesday. So, like, again, all of that being sort of a retrospect type of a thing here. Now Memphis can gather it up again here, and I think they end up covering this game again. I think this is pretty close to the line, and if there was an adjustment that needed to be made, the market would do so. And maybe by the time this game closes, it ends up being less than that because people are piling in on the T-Wolves. This is just one where I look at it and I go, okay, like, if you were on the underdog in this is maybe one where you want to step away. I'm not saying definitely bet Memphis, whatever, but like, I would be very worried about this type of a situation here. It helps our series bet on the over 5.5 total games. If Memphis loses yet another game, now I'm going to start getting worried on the opposite side. You and I talked about whether you do the +1.5 or the 5.5 games and how you sort of parse that out. Yeah, like, I don't really want the Timberwolves to win this game or win the series, in 4 or 5 games. That would not be ideal. But I look at it and I go, okay, series price here is kind of interesting now, right? Like, we went from a series that look at this way, right? The line was -300, +350, +360, something along those lines for Minnesota. And we saw last year with Memphis going on the road, I believe it was against Utah, where they go and they win the first game in that series. And it just catapults, or plummets, if you will, the series price downward. Right now, Memphis can be had at -140, and all they did was lose one game. And, like, yes, it was a home game, but this is like a pretty massive adjustment on the idea that, okay, yeah, even if Memphis wins this next game, which are obviously they're heavily favored to do, that they will have a problem winning a game in Minnesota. I just don't see that being the case, because as much as we close our eyes and see Pat Bev on the desk, swinging the shirt around, throwing it around, going nuts, right? And we sort of assign a home court advantage that's maybe a little extra to Minnesota. That was a team that was still down relatively significantly to the Clippers in that game. And Paul George probably had COVID in that game, like, based on the fact that he literally tested positive just a couple of days later. Like, that could have gotten away from the T-Wolves very, very quickly in that situation. And I trust Memphis and this group a lot more than I do that group of Clippers. So I think they can win a game on the road. And so, yeah, we might get our 6-game series or our 7-game series and be able to cash our over 5.5 games bet relatively comfortably here, because I think we haven't heard the last from Memphis. But at -140, given that, again, nothing's changed here necessarily from a game-to-game standpoint, they've just sort of thrown one here to Minnesota, obviously not literally. I'm looking at maybe a Memphis -140 series bet here, knowing that, like, Memphis has a little bit more experience here. They can win on the road. And obviously there isn't an injury or a massive adjustment to the game-to-game line and the power ratings, if you will, of these two teams, because that's what changes these lines, right? The lines are built off of power ratings. So when the Raptors get, downgraded power rating, that's what changes a line from 4.5 to 7.5. Well, with this loss, there was no reason in a one-game situation to downgrade the Memphis Grizzlies here. And so, yes, obviously being down one means there has to be an adjustment to the series price, but to go from -300, like a 75% win probability, down to -140, which is barely over 50%. I just don't think that this is an opportunity to jump on Memphis from the series standpoint and maybe hit both sides of this, right? Where we end up getting a Memphis in 6 games. Or think about it this way. All this has to do is get to game 7. We will have cashed over 5.5 on the total games. And now we'll have Memphis in game 7 at home for -140, which, if you look at the money line right now, is considerably higher than -140. So I think this is time to hop in here on the Grizzlies from a series standpoint.
Yeah, no, I totally get it. And it's a series that I just can't wait to continue to watch, because I just think it is a great matchup of two really, like, just interestingly matched teams and two teams basically at the same point in terms of being a young team that is starting to like figure themselves out. So definitely interested to see how that series goes.